Hi everyone, it's Denise with Wondubar Crafts. Today's video, I want to talk a little bit about some quilting basics. As you may already know, I am going to be doing a small series on quilt wall hangings. And for beginners or those people who just want to have something different to do, different crafts to do. So that's what this video is about today. So then that way I can, during the actual sewing video, if you need to refer back, you don't have to keep finding that very first video. I can link it in there to be able to go and view if you need to go back and look at it again to remind yourself. Because, you know, when you first begin to quilt, unless you start to do it more frequently, you might not remember certain terminologies or anything like that. So that is what this video is about today. I hope everyone is doing well and everyone is being safe. We are in the midst of a snowstorm today. Dusting to 3 inches is not what happened here. We are probably about 4 right now, and I can barely see the highway from here because it's so thick. But I hope everyone is being safe. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin. So for any of you that are new to quilting, this might be something that is going to be extremely helpful for you later as we go through the videos and start piecing things and cutting things and quilting things. So make sure that you refer back to this video. So let's begin with some basic tools that you're going to need for any quilting project. All right, first things first, obviously you're going to need a cutting mat. Unless you're going to use the AccuQuilt system, and even with that system, if you need to cut your longer strips and cut them down to smaller sizes, like because you may not have a block that fits that yet, or they may not have one that fits that size square or rectangle or even triangle, you will still need to do a little bit of cutting. So you will need a cutting mat, a good one. Make sure that you get one that is self-healing, and I would suggest not one smaller than 24 inches by 18 inches. That will fit a fat quarter on your mat comfortably. You will also be able to spread out longer pieces. There's obviously bigger cutting mats, and I do have one, but I only use that for larger quilt projects when I have a lot that I have to cut. You'll also need a good rotary cutter. All right, I prefer ones that have a safety guard because I am accident prone. So this one has a cover. Olaf has them. They're very good. They all take the standard 45 millimeter blade on them. You can also get the bigger 60 millimeter, which from what I understand, I've never used one. They are really good for cutting larger, like if you have quite a few layers or thicker fabric, like flannel or plush, that kind of stuff. So you're definitely, this is a must, is to get a cutting board, a cutting mat, and a rotary cutter. Now there are different kinds of rotary cutters, and I will show you that here in a minute. But you are also going to need an iron and an ironing board, because you're going to need to iron your seam allowances, either open or to one of the other sides. So make sure you have a good ironing board and an iron that will heat up for a cotton setting, because when you're quilting, normally you're using cotton fabrics. There are quilts out there, quilters that do other things like crazy quilts, and you can also invest in just a small little ironing board that will fit right over the top of your mat, so that you know, once you've done your piecing, you've cut all your pieces, and then you begin to do your piecing of your blocks, it's just right there, and it's handy, and it tucks away. I as far as irons go, there's so many different ones out there, and it really, most people do have an iron. I have a big iron that I use for ironing the larger pieces of fabric. You do not need to go out and buy a smaller one. I like having that small one for smaller pieces. And there's even smaller, just little ones that are, they sit on a little placard that you can just do the seams with. I do have one, but I really don't like using it unless I'm doing very, very small, intricate pieces, because it does not have like it has a mounting bracket that you sit it on, but it doesn't have anything it covers. And like I said, I'm accident prone, so I've burnt myself a couple times on that. So, but that's really your preference for an iron. You're also going to need, obviously, a sewing machine to piece your pieces, and needles. I will say, I like to be conservative, and I didn't used to change my needle with every project, and I found that doing project after project after project, my needle dulled, which also meant that I had a lot of larger holes that were noticeable to me through where the thread, where you sew, because the needle is not sharp. And you can have also other issues with your machine not picking up the thread and all that. So I use a universal needle. They're good for, let me show you. I have a new camera angle, if you guys have not noticed. I did this purposely so that you could see more of the mat in my work area. But anyways, so I use a medium 80-12 for quilting. You can use, I think it's like a 75-14, I believe. Let me double check on that real quick. Oh, no, I just realized that that's a 75-11, and that's an embroidery needle. So no, we don't want to use that one. So use, I would say, an 80-12, unless your machine specifically says to use a certain brand or certain type of needle for regular sewing, then I would recommend using what your machine says. But the universal are really good, and they're by Lassie, I think that's how you say it, Lassie. Okay, so needles, new needle every project. Now, that being said, if you're doing a very small project, so some of the quilts that we are going to do are small projects. They're very small, 20 by 20. You could probably go 2 quilting projects without, but I would not suggest doing it any longer than that. 2 projects for those smaller ones, and change the needle. You can always, if you're a crafter that likes to sew on paper, keep those needles to sew on your paper with. Okay, so you're going to need pins, quilting safety pins if you prefer. It's however you like. I would suggest at least having both on hand, because I'm accident prone and I always catch myself with needles, but I will be using them in these projects because I cannot find my basting board. But a quilting needle is bent, or the safety pin, it is bent. And it's done purposely so that you can get up underneath that without shifting your fabric too much. Okay, so quilting pins or safety pins, straight pins, make sure you get some nice long ones so you can go through all of your quilt top, your batting, and your backing. You can use a basting gun, and essentially what this is are those little tags. So let me show you. You put it through your fabric, but you need a bottom basting board, and it has a bunch of holes in it so that you can poke through and put those on there. I do like using it, but I can't find my basting board. So until I either find it, because I don't want to go out and buy another one, I will just continue to use the safety pins and the pins. And then of course, these are the Basting Gun Tacks that you use with them. So if you're going to use something like that, I think I got mine at Hobby Lobby, I believe. And then I love these clips, these fabric clips. They're great for all kinds of projects, so they're multi-use. But I do like to use them when I pin the center, and then I clip my, because your batting and your backing will be bigger, to clip them together while I'm quilting. And then when I put my binding on, I use the clips. They just seem to be much better and hold in place better than pins do for that portion. You're going to need rulers. This is important, ladies and gents. Rulers. So minimally, I would get a squaring ruler. Okay. This one, I believe, is a 6.5 inch squaring ruler. And I wouldn't go any smaller than this to square. You can get them with an 8.5 inch outer square, because most of the quilt blocks that we will do in these projects are about 8.5 inch blocks unfinished, 8 inch finished. And then the inner square is a 4.5 inch square. So I get yourself a squaring ruler. That's going to be important to do those smaller blocks. And then to cut, you are going to need a long, I would say, this one is, what, 24 inches. So it's the length of my mat, which is perfect. All right. And you're going to use this to not only strip cut, but to also actually help you square your fabrics before you cut them. All right. Or Flaskers has this nice one, and it is really good, especially if you tend to cut crooked like I do sometimes. And the great thing is the Rotary Cutter is built in, and so you have this nice long, it is longer than my table or my mat by a few inches. I think it's 25 inch, and it has the Rotary Cutter. You can't cut yourself on the bottom because you have to push it down to expose the blade. Okay, but the cool thing is it has a rubber, a little, well, it's not really rubber, it's like a foam piece, and it helps to grip onto either the rotary mat or your fabric so you don't get the shifting. So this one is a good one if you're going to invest, and this is something that you really want to do and you plan on doing more projects. I would recommend this for your rotary cutting. That way it saves you from getting a rotary cutter and all that. Of course, you can always have this for smaller projects, but you can square your smaller bits with this. It just, you just got to maneuver it a little more. But if you're going to do a lot of strip piecing, that is the way to go. And let's see, scissors, fabric only scissors. Okay, you don't want to pull out a pair of scissors that you've used on other projects, because when you cut fabric, you want them nice and sharp, and you want them to be able to have a nice smooth cut. Because otherwise, if you get one piece that's nicked or whatever, it will affect how you cut, and you could end up cutting into. Now, having a rotary cutter, you're going to ask, why do I need scissors? Well, you're going to have to cut that excess around your quilt from your batting and your backing. So you want a good pair of scissors for that. You are going to need, for your machine, and I'll show you as we go through certain projects, there are different feet that you may want to use that may help you a little bit, but you're going to want your standard foot. Okay, whatever foot came with your sewing machine. Normally will have one little hole in there. You can use it, but if it comes with an opening here in the center, use it. Okay, because it's going to help you guide your fabric through. And most of the time with these style, okay, your foot will have like little 1/8 inch 1/8 of an inch, a third, 3/8 of an inch, a 1/4 inch, and possibly even a 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch marker on it. Okay. Now I have a specialty foot for mine that is intended just for quilt piecing. It has a little guide here that is set where the needle comes down. It's a 1/4 inch exactly. So when I feed my fabric through, it bumps up against this guide and it keeps it at a 1/4 inch. You do not have to run out and get one because sometimes some of them, depending on the machine, can be pricey. So for this little finagle, what you can do to save yourself some money, this is $3.99, and you can get them at, I think, Joann's. I got this at my sewing store in Springfield. However, I think you can get them at Joann's. I don't know about Hobby Lobby, but there are other things on Amazon and their guides. This is magnetic, so it holds right to the plate of my machine, and I set a ruler from the center of my needle where it comes down out a 1/4 inch, and that's where I set it so that my fabric will line as I push it through. And it's, like I said, it's magnetic. It's very inexpensive, and I didn't have to pay, some of those these specialty feet can be pricey. Some are $20 and some can range up to $60, just depending on what brand of machine you have. But make sure that, I will tell you, it will be much easier if you have a foot that's open. Okay. You're going to need some all-purpose thread. Okay. I know there's quilting thread on the market that is more intended for when you do a quilt top. It's really best to use that for hand quilting, but you can, if your machine has the right size needle in it, and you can use it through your machine. But I will tell you, it's a much thicker, and you will have to really spend some time going slow to sew with it. You're going to need a seam ripper, and I will tell you, this is probably one of the most important, if not the most important tools to have when quilting. And I say that because from time to time, you will have a piece that you accidentally either sewed a larger seam allowance or too small. That small little fraction, I mean, a very small, minute, 1/2 millimeter is not going to be that big of an issue. But when you go 1/8 of an inch over or under, that can offset your quilt look, your quilt block, and how it sets and how it mates against your other blocks. So handy tool to have. All right, I would also suggest that you have just a standard ruler. Okay, it's good to have to mark your seam allowance. If you can't find anything like this that's magnetic, there are other alternatives on Amazon for, just look for a seam guide for your machine, or if you can't find it magnetic, there are pieces that they have kind of like that foamy, sticky, but you can, like a cling kind of thing where you can pull it off very easily and it doesn't leave a sticky residue, and you can use that instead. And it's a little bit thicker, so you can push your fabric up against it and it's fine. But you'll need something to mark that area, so a ruler is good to have. And one other ruler I want to, or actually, yeah, it is a ruler somewhat, is this. I got this at Hobby Lobby, and I can tell you, when you have a lot of strips to cut, and there will be a block upcoming, I will probably be using the AccuQuilt to cut my strips, but this really helps because it's 12 inches, and you can, as you can see, it's cut apart in 1/2 inch increments. So once you square your fabric, you can lay this down and it holds the fabric in place, squared. You don't have to worry about shifting. And what you do is you put your rotary cutter right here in this little teardrop, and you just run it right through that, whoop, all the way up. Okay, and you can cut it. So you just, if you needed a 1 inch, you'd cut it here at the 1. If you needed a 1.5, you just go 1 over, 2 inch, and so on. So then your fabric is laying down and you're rotary cutting all the way 12 inches out. And then you can just lift it up, slide your fabric over, re-square it, lay this back down. And if you have multiple cuts, because this will help you keep a straight line. Just make sure that when you're, you hold it down just like any other ruler. So, and I really hope that this is helping you guys somewhat. So let's talk about, let me see, make sure that we have all the tools. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about some of the basics, okay? Your fabric. Now, quilters have from all different places, have different ways that they do it. They've done it for years this way. It works perfect for them. And so I will tell you, when you quilt, you're going to use cotton fabric, and cotton shrinks. So if you're going to make a wall hanging and you know that you're not going to take it off the wall, but every so often, like I do, I'll take them down and I will wash them in a delicate wash with using Delft, okay, because it's a baby laundry detergent. It's not harsh on my fabrics, and it doesn't give a big huge spin and wash and all that stuff like a normal wash would do. It's just enough to wash it, or you can hand wash them. You do not need to pre-wash your fabrics, but I will tell you, I do, because if you are going to wash them, you will get some shrinkage. Even if you in the washing machine, you're going to get a little bit of shrinkage or some shifting. So it's best to pre-wash your fabrics and iron them after. I don't use fabric softener. I just use the Delft to wash it. It gets, I don't know if you guys ever bought fabric and you smelt it and it smells a little funny. That is because when it's shipped over from overseas, they use formaldehyde to store it so that bugs and stuff like that don't get into your fabric like moths and eat holes in it. So it's good to wash all that stuff. It washes all that out. You get your shrinkage done. I put it in a normal dry, not hot, just, like a regular drying phase that you would do with your other cotton fabrics, right? So then iron it out, iron it really smooth, and then I'm going to show you how to, here in a little while, I'm going to show you how to square your fabric after you iron it out and prep it for cutting. So there are going to be people that say, no, you don't need to do all that. Well, no, you don't. For a wall hanging, you would not. For a bed quilt, I will say, yes, you should, because you don't want to get done with this beautiful quilt, put it in the washing machine, get it out, and it's puckered and it's shifted and it's not sitting right anymore. And it will happen. Believe me. I learned the hard way, because I used to pre-wash my fabric, and then I had someone tell me, no, don't. You'll get better piecing ability. Your fabrics will lay because when you put it in the dryer, you're fluffing your fabric. It's just like cotton. It's going to fluff a little bit, right? But if you use a good iron, you'll press it back down again. So I had a quilt that shifted, and I just, my daughter uses it as a throw quilt on the back of her couch, but I can see where it's shifted, and it just drives me bananas. But you put all that hard work in, and you want to make sure that you do it correctly, right? So let's talk a minute. Let me put this away real quick, and then I want to talk a little bit about fabric grains, okay? Because I think that is very important, especially as a beginner, to understand all of that. Okay, so I have a fat quarter here, and I think it's best to show it using a fat quarter, right? So let's talk about a little bit about fabric. So you know that it's woven, and the threads that they run not only lengthwise but widthwise. So, and the direction of these threads are called the grain. Okay. And all the pieces normally will be cut against, or will be cut along the grain of the fabric. So your fabric has two salvage edges. And I know it sounds weird because, you know, these are normally the ends that most people will either, well, for me, I keep the salvage ends because I use them in crafting, but some people pitch them. So your salvage ends, okay, and this, because it is a fat quarter, does not have the other end over here. But your salvage end would typically be the other side. So salvage normally means you're saving it, correct? Well, but why is it called a salvage if you're just going to cut it off and throw it away? Well, it's there to save the fabric from raveling. Because if you ever notice that if you cut a piece down here, you'll be able to pull on it and see you got a thread here. And then it just threads and threads and frays and frays and frays. So it's there to save the edges of the fabric while it is being stored or not in use. So that's why you have a salvage edge. Okay, so if we were to lay out our fabric and we were to cut it, or we go to fold it in half, we're going to do salvage end to salvage end. So the way that the fabric, this is the lengthwise grain, and this is the crosswise grain that goes from salvage end to salvage end. That's the crosswise. That is the way you're going to cut your fabric for piecing. Okay, and there is another method that I will show you later on how to do biased. But your biased runs from this direction to that direction, or, you know, vice versa. So it's the cross, it's like the diagonal piece. And the lengthwise grain has a little bit of stretch, just a little bit. And your crosswise won't have any of stretch like that. Not as much as your lengthwise. But if you were to fold this in half and pull, you can see it stretches, because that is going against both the lengthwise and the crosswise grains. So you've got all those threads stretching. And when you do normally, there's two different ways that you can do biased, and in the first quilt I'm going to show you how to do just a straight grain, which is how we will cut it, like we will cut on normal pieces like this. So we'll cut across in the crosswise direction, okay? And then you can make biased, which, you know, when you go to the store and you buy it, you notice it's really stretchy, okay? It's because it's cut against the biased. So it's cut against both those grains. So you get the stretch in that tape. All right, and in doing that, that is a really good way. Biased is really good to use on larger quilt projects. So I would say large wall hangings, throws, and quilts. But if you're making a small wall hanging across a standard crosswise, or the standard grain is fine to do, because it doesn't need all that. It's not a heavy quilt, and it's not going to have all that weight to pull it or to keep it intact, you know. So because when you have like throws and quilts, you're going to put them in the washing machine, so you want that stretchy to kind of keep it, you know, so that you have that flexibility like you do in normal clothing. So okay, so stitch lengths on your machine. You're going to want to set your sewing machine for short straight stitches, so about 12 stitches per inch. If your machine is on a metric setting, it normally is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6. Set it at 3 for piecing. When we're quilting on top of the quilt, whenever all the pieces are together, you'll want to move it to, I think it's like 16 per inches, which is a 4 millimeter. because your long loose stitches, unless you're hand quilting and you have a way to knot it off, they will they'll come undone. Trust me, they will come undone. And small stitches also, that's going to add some strength to your patchwork. It's also recommended that you chain link your pieces together, and in the video I will show you how to chain link on that, so you don't need to worry about that too much right now, because that is something that I will show you in the video. When you're doing when you're piecing your pieces together, unless the pattern dictates, always go with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And normally because when you variate from that and you go, oh, let me go larger, oh, let me go smaller, it's going to distort the shape of your quilt in the end. So like I said, make sure that you're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After you piece those together, you're going to want to iron them. Most of the time you will iron towards a darker fabric so that you can't see that seam allowance behind. Some quilt projects will tell you to open your seams and so that you have, you know, your darker goes to your darker and your lighter goes to your lighter. And normally you would do that in smaller pieces because you don't want that excess bulk. But in a larger quilt piece like this, you're fine. For a wall hanging, you're fine. And anywhere that tells you, it will, in the quilt instructions, it will tell you which direction to iron your seam allowance to. So normally it's to the darker, but sometimes it may be that you need to line them up. So, but the way that the quilt is designed, you have a lighter color here, a darker, and then, you know, even possibly even darker or just a medium. And so just follow the instructions, but if it does not tell you, always press to the darker side of the fabric so that you can't see it through the back side. All right, so preparing your batting. Batting comes in many different forms. You're going to find the big, thick, fluffy, thick stuff that you get that you will use like in pillows. You can also use that kind of stuff in your quilts to give it more fullness and dimension. But I will tell you, it's sometimes can be quite the pain to quilt underneath because of the thickness. And it's not recommended to, I would not recommend trying to stitch in the ditch with that, because you're probably going to shift your under fabric on there. I use a warm, what is it? The Warm and, let me think here. I think it's Warm and, well, I have some over here. Let me find it. Okay, for these projects, I will probably use the Warm and White. You can get them in different sizes. This one is a 34 by 45 inch. It'll get cut down to the size that I need for the quilt, plus a few inches around, so that I have, so just in case, because you are quilting, you will get a little bit of pucker. Okay, that's inevitable. It's gonna do that. It's not going to pucker on the top. I'm just saying, you know, you want that fullness in there to make it look like it's quilted. So you, but you can get these up into king size and California kings too. But I buy the smaller pieces just so I can typically get like one good quilt or one good project out of it, and the excess. In later videos, I will show you how you can sew batting together so that you can use it to piece if you have a bunch of salvage pieces that you want to sew together. There's also Warm and Neutral. It is a it's an off-white color. Okay, so it's pretty much the same thing. It's just it's not been bleached. And really, I buy it depending on what's on sale. So, or which ones. not as expensive as the other. But this particular one is not 100% cotton. You can buy 100% cotton. Poly, I do know, makes the 100% cotton. It's a little more pricey because it is 100%. I do have it because I use it in my, when I make oven mitts and that kind of stuff, because you don't want to use any of that in the microwave for like the bowl cozies and that kind of stuff, because sometimes the poly can ignite. So, you know, but for these, you can use the poly. You're fine, because I don't think you're going to be putting your quilts in the microwave. At least I hope not. I'm going to warn you against that. Don't do it. Okay, so preparing it, make sure that when you cut your piece out, so I have a piece here pre-cut for doing this next quilt project, you're going to get some fold lines in here. You can iron it. Just iron it on a wool setting, not on the cotton. Even though it is cotton, use a wool setting and just kind of lightly go over it just to kind of smooth it as much as possible. You're not going to get every single wrinkle out of it, but you want it as smooth as possible. Okay, but I've gotten it to where it's, you know, it kind of looks like this, where, you know, you might see the wrinkle, but it's not as exaggerated as like the fold and all that. Okay, and your backing, the same thing. Okay, make sure that you try and use I try to use a neutral or a coordinating fabric for this upcoming project. This fabric will not be in the front of the quilt, but it coordinates with the colors because it's from the same Fabric Traditions line. The colors coordinate with the front. Does it matter? Not really. If it's against the wall, unless you have company over that likes to peer underneath things, probably never going to see it. So some people will use white, or they'll use like a muslin on the back, and that's perfectly fine to do. But just make sure that it's cotton as well, okay, so that it will, and pre-washed. Okay, so that's kind of it for that. What I'd like to do now is show you guys how to square your fabric. And the reason why I want to do this is so that way if you go back, because in the future videos, I will tell you what you need to cut. I will also list the dies that if you want to use the AccuQuilt system, the AccuQuilt cutters, I will tell you what dies to use and then what inches you need to cut down from there, if any. And so you will kind of you'll need to cut it on your own, but I want to show you how to square it and how to make a few cuts so you'll understand what you'll need to do. Okay, so let me grab some fabric and we'll square it off. All right, so I have two pieces here, and this piece will be fabric that I'm using in my other, but I kind of wanted to show you what can happen if you, and I kind of purposely cut it kind of on the wonk. What happens if you don't square it and you think it's square and you don't square it and you just start cutting. So if you notice, I can square this end up with the bottom of a line, and then it goes up, it tapers up. And that can be it's obviously from not laying your fabric and getting your salvages together, and then when you fold again up to that point, you didn't make sure that the creases are out. So as you can see, it's not cut straight, but I did that purposely just to show you guys. Also, when you get fabric off the bolt, oftentimes, and I'm sure you guys have done it, you've noticed that it doesn't sit right. It's not, they measured it to a yard here, but I didn't get a full yard because that piece is not off. But the other piece is shifted, so it's a full yard. It's just not what it needs to be. So when purchasing your fabric, take that into consideration. If it says 1/2 inch, ask them to cut a few additional, I would say maybe at the most another 1/8 of an inch, or 1/8 to a 1/16 larger for squaring purposes. Because if it calls for a full yard and they give you a yard And even if you don't wash it and you try to square it, you could be off and not have enough fabric. So just take that into consideration. I always, if it tells me, and I'm not telling you guys to do this, it's totally up to you how you do it. But for me, if it calls for a yard, I always ask for a yard and a quarter. That way it gives me extra in case I make a mistake, because I am human and I do make them, so that I can correct myself and I have a little extra, and for squaring reasons. Okay. So as you can see, this is not, it's not cut right, but you know, I did that just so you guys could see what happens if you don't square it. So I have a little bit bigger piece over here. And I didn't want to get a big old yard piece out because it's very hard to see on this table anyway, because my camera is not facing forward. But what you're going to do is you're going to align your salvage ends. So see, here's the salvage, here's the salvage. And you're going to pick it up and just kind of shake it a little bit. If you have a big yard piece, take it right about in the middle. It doesn't have to be exactly the middle. Just take it up right about in the middle and just kind of align your pieces and pick it up. You know, normally I do this over the ironing board, you know, so that, because I normally get done ironing and I do it while it's still warm. But if you'll notice, it's still a little wonky. See, it's not laying correctly. So to do that, you are going to have to shift it. So put your finger between the salvages and just shift it a little bit until you think it sits correctly. And you can kind of lay it out and see how it's sitting nice now. But do you see how much it's off over here? That's quite a bit. I mean, that's what, ½ inch at least? So that's why it's important we square. Okay. So what I do is I just kind of smooth it, and if it just kind of comes up and smooths real nice, I know that it's squared there. And then I'm going to fold up, and some people do it the opposite direction. There's no right or wrong with which way your fold goes. If you're more comfortable folding it down to see the fold, that's fine. But what you want to do is, like I said, you're going to smooth that out, and then you're going to want to come up and make sure that your salvage edges are even, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect to the top, just so that it comes up to the fold, okay? And as you can see now, my edges are off, see? So it's important that when I go to square this, okay, that at least the furthest piece in, which is this piece, covers over one of the lines. So for this reason, I would normally start over here at 1, but I guess I can do it because you guys should be able to see. So I want to make sure that this piece right here hangs over that first one, that very first line there, okay? Now I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to pull it down to even it up on my line here. Okay, so it's even, it's squared. We want it on there. And I will tell you, and a nice easy way to do this, if you're not going to use a strip cutter, or even when you do, is to lay your long ruler. Okay, make sure that you put it about 1 inch over and that this line matches up to your ruler. Okay, so let me pull it in a little bit so you can see on this side. Okay, so I'm gonna lay this here, and then I want this fabric to kind of come down like that so that it butts up against the ruler. I'm going to do that one more time for you. Okay, I'm going to even it on the bottom line, and I'm just going to make sure that that lays even against that ruler, and which means it's even against that line. Now I'm going to put 1 inch over just to ensure, and it's even. Okay, so I can either rotate this without shifting my fabric. And because I know that this is going to be over here, I'm just going to cut this piece right off, because I'll just stick it in my scrap bin here. Okay, so you'd go here and then you'd use your Rotary Cutter and cut it straight. Now I know that my fabric is straight, right? It's squared. Now, I want to show you how easy it is to use this ruler. So I'm going to stay right here and I'm going to square it. And I don't have to worry about the Rotary Cutter being on there, because until I put pressure down, I'm going to put my hand down on it. There you go. This does need a new blade on it. I haven't used it in a bit. So there you go. Now to tack, you can take that little salvage edge and right up against here, you can lay it here and just make sure you lay it out on that edge and make sure that it was even. So it's very straight. So I know that it's a straight line. It's not all wonky crooked. It's not whatever. So some people will cut from here. I will hold this over my fabric to keep it from shifting. So let's just cut like two 2-inch slices. Okay. So 1, 2 inches again, right on the line. Cut it again. Okay. Now, the reason why I don't use this one is I'm a wonky cutter. I don't know why. But I don't move my pieces until I've done cutting that segment. So if I need 4 pieces, I'll cut my 4 pieces. Then I'll move this piece away. Okay. And that leaves me with 2 strips. And of course that cutter, I need a new blade in there, so my apologies for that, but okay. But if you have a new blade in there, it'll go really easy. So now I have 2 squared straight pieces. When I'm going to cut them down, I can layer them. I would suggest, now the AccuQuilt, you can cut 3 of these strips, which is 6 pieces of fabric layered. Okay. For rotary cutting reasons, I would suggest only 2. So you want to try and keep these pieces aligned as much as possible and line them up once again with the line. And if you squared it, it should be right nice and square. Okay. It seems like a lot of work. It is. I'll be honest. It is a lot of work, but it's so worth it to make sure that your fabric is squared correctly. Because when you go to piece, those pieces will fit right nice and square on top of each other, and you'll have less stress trying to figure out, oh my God, my pieces are off. So you can use a smaller one with a smaller piece. Cut your salvage off. And if it tells you, oh, let's cut a 4.5-inch piece, okay? Just make sure that your line can measure up. And so like on this one, I know that this is, it's either a 1/4 or 1/2, and I can look at it and clearly see that that is 1/2 inch, okay? I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to line it up on my grid with my grid on the ruler, grid on the table. Okay, and that is not 4.5 because I cut 1 inch in. That would be 4.5. You just cut them. Okay, you can move them from here if you need out of the way, but slide your ruler, okay, and just re-square if you need to. See it? I've shifted it a little bit. That's okay. But by taking your time to do this, I'm telling you, when you piece, it is going to make the world of difference. Okay. So then you're just going to stack your pieces and continue to go. So remember that when you are cutting, you're cutting your cross length or crosswise, which is, remember, salvage to salvage. Okay, salvage to salvage. When it's folded like this, when it's up and down, when your salvage is either on the top or on the bottom, that direction, which most of your cotton fabrics are, anywhere from 40 to 45 inches in width. So you can figure 20 to, what is that, 23.5 inches or so. Okay. This is the direction you're going to cut your fabric. Just like that. Okay. Not unless it tells you to cut your fabrics this way, which would be the lengthwise grain. Don't do that. You want to cut it salvage to salvage and then the fold up on the salvage. Okay. And then when you cut, you're going to lay your strip pieces lengthwise, length grain, and then just cut the shorter pieces to cut them into the square or rectangle or triangle or whatever piece that you need. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Like I said, just make sure that when you look at how much you need, get yourself just a little bit extra for salvage and just for mistakes. You don't have to double it or anything like that. Normally, normally the only time you really may have a mistake is like you didn't bring it all the way to the edge, and like I did, I went to cut at 4.5, but it really only would have been 3.5, and then you would have realized, oh, it's too short. So, but I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to answer as many as I can. And I will I will be doing another as we start to progress. And there are different cutting techniques that you will need, like doing biased cutting. I will do a separate video so that you can always go back just to this video and review instead of trying to find the quilt project that had that in there. Okay, so I hope this helps you guys. I'm so excited to be able to do this new series with you all, and I really hope you guys will join along. I'm going to encourage you guys to post your projects on my Facebook group at Wondubar Crafts and on Instagram, which I will leave those links below. I will also leave a link to the AccuQuilt system if you guys are interested in taking a look. If this is something, if you are already a quilter and you struggle with strip piecing or your rotary cutting, I'm telling you, it is worth every penny. It is worth every penny. And I will tell you, most of the AccuQuilt systems and dies that I have, the cutter and the dies that I purchase, I do when they're having a sale. Okay, and they have them quite frequently, so always check it out. It's always good always great to hit a sale, right? So that's what I say. So until next time, guys, plenty of hugs, loves, and blessings, and I'm so excited to see you guys in the next upcoming videos. Mwah. Bye, guys. Love you.